Kylie Moore-Gilbert is an Australian-British political scientist focusing on the Middle East. In 2018, she was invited to a conference in the Islamic Republic of Iran. At the airport preparing to depart, she was detained by the intelligence arm of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Soon after, she was imprisoned and charged with espionage. No evidence was ever presented. The Australian government rejected the charges as baseless. 2 years later, she was released in exchange for 3 convicted Iranian terrorists connected to a bomb plot in Bangkok in 2012. 2 years ago, Dr. Moore-Gilbert published a memoir, which soon became a bestseller. It's titled The Uncaged Sky, My 804 Days in an Iranian Prison. I highly recommended you buy it, and I highly recommend you read it. I'm pleased to welcome her to FDD's headquarters. Also with us is Behnam Ben Taleblu, a senior fellow at FDD, where he focuses on Iranian security and political issues. I'm Cliff May, and I'm always pleased to welcome you to the conversation here on Foreign Policy. Well, thank you for stopping by.
Thanks so much for having me on.
I'm going to just start right with them. When you were invited to this conference in Iran, were you at all worried? Did it occur to you that this might be a bad idea, that they might say, oh, here's a nice, bright, pretty young woman. Let's arrest her and charge her with espionage and see what we can get. Did that even occur to you before you went?
Certainly didn't occur to me that they would arrest me, charge me with espionage or any of what followed. Obviously, if you travel to a country like Iran, you do have security concerns, more generally speaking. You always think it'll never happen to me. I haven't done anything wrong. I'm an innocent person. I'm not going there with bad intentions. Therefore, I should be fine as long as I'm open about that. But I did take what I thought were security measures, or the most basic of not being on social media, deleting my accounts, wiping that kind of thing from my devices, not posting anything negative about Iran online, obviously, particularly when I'm there. I hadn't ever published or written anything about Iran. I wasn't a scholar of Iran, so I didn't have a public record commenting on taboo subjects in Iran, like the nuclear program, for example, or women's rights, or etc. So I thought I'd taken precautions, and this was a trip approved by my university. I'd undertaken an ethics approval process, and I'd passed that, and I thought I was good to go.
Sometimes it seems to me, they want to discuss this, and Behnam, you've given some thought to this. They take people because they actually think they may be spies. You and I did a podcast, I was back in September of 2023, with Shiwei Wang and Gazelle Sharmat. Shiwei, and I may go over this with people to remind them, but Shiwei was an American of not only Chinese descent, born in China. He went over there as a scholar from Princeton University. His studies were arcane. He was studying like 19th century, do you remember?
Central Asia and Afghanistan and Russo-Persianates.
And his professors at Princeton had encouraged him to go. And the same thing with you. As he got to, when he was finished, he'd worked in the archives, learned a little Farsi, gets to the airport, they pick him up, and what he knew, and tell me if your memories are the same, they made it very clear to him, we know you're not a spy. We don't care. You're a pawn. And this is the way the world works. It's something we want, and we can trade you for it. Why would we not? And as for Gazelle Sharmat, her father has been in prison there for years. And because, there's been really no effort to get him out or even trade him as far as I know. Is this the way you remember?
That's unfortunately, that remains the case. Her father was picked up via the Dubai airport, then moved to Oman based on where his cell phone tracker was. Then it went active again in Iran, where he was shown cuffed, and then he was given the death sentence. The death sentence was approved once again in a higher Iranian quote-unquote court. Throughout the entire time, this person has been subject to physical and psychological torture. The Germans, the Americans keep playing table tennis with him because he's a German citizen and a U.S., I think, permanent resident or U.S. resident. Yeah. His daughter and his children are U.S. citizens. They continue to raise his case before the State Department. But just like every other major hostage case, this person continues to be left behind. You see the Europeans leave people behind. The Americans leave people behind. The French leave people behind. This is far too common, unfortunately.
Well, we're going to get into the policy aspects of this that we don't have or should have in a bit. But was it your impression, and maybe your impression changed over time, that they thought, oh, you might actually be a spy. You had been to Israel. You have, I remember, had an Israeli husband. Maybe they really thought so, or did you, like Shiwei, think, oh no, I'm useful. I'm a chip they can put on the table and get something for. How did that evolve in your mind?
I think they knew I wasn't a spy. The people who directly interrogated me, the people that asked all the questions that I would see on a daily basis for months and months during my incarceration in Evin Prison's Dualif unit run by the IRGC, they knew I wasn't a spy. And it was pretty obvious and pretty clear. And they didn't really behave directly with me as though they thought I was. But the moment I was convicted in an extremely dodgy, farcical kangaroo court by the infamous judge Salavati, which I think Shiwei also and Jamshid Sharmaht also appeared before.
And also our colleague here at FED, Saeed Qassemi-Nejad, was also sentenced and tried, I believe, before Abdul Qasim Salavati.
Really?
The same
I believe
judge.
So. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Is he a cleric, this judge?
No, he's not a cleric.
IRGC background, right?
IRGC background, okay.
He's actually relatively young. I think looks like he's in his 40s, maybe max 50 years old.
But he's making
big
quite a
thuggish
career
guy
for himself, obviously.
Yeah.
Failing upwards.
Well,
Just like Raisi.
Did
Yeah,
you have a defense
basically.
lawyer?
I had a lawyer that I was not able to meet to discuss my case with,
That's
and who
inconvenient.
had to sit miles away from me in the room, so I couldn't even sort of make eye contact with.
Why? Did they say why? Because he's a male and you're a female, or because
No.
they didn't want a defense lawyer doing? I mean, he knew his job was to pretend as an.
He was a genuine lawyer who was doing his best and was threatened by them on multiple occasions on
really?
account of trying to defend me. So he has defended other political prisoners. I think he was Michael White's lawyer as well. I do feel for the guy because he did his best, but what can you do when the whole system's stacked against you and it's a foregone conclusion anyway, right?
During your trial, were you put on the stand to testify?
I wasn't allowed to present evidence in my defense. And don't forget, I didn't speak Farsi. So I was...
You learned some. We're going to get to that.
I learned Farsi in prison.
You didn't waste your time in 2 years in Iran entirely.
No, but when I was brought before Salavati's court, I went to court about 4 times and then a 5th time to hear the verdict.
Uh-huh.
It was me in the center of this bear pit, scrum of IRGC men, all of them sitting around me in a U shape. Behind me, I couldn't see them all unless I turned and craned my neck towards them. This panel of judges, or Salavati and his cronies above me, all talking in Farsi, nobody translating a thing for me. So I had to sit in this courtroom for hours listening to people in Farsi, and occasionally the court-appointed interpreter, if someone asked me a direct question, he would interpret and tell me in English, and I'd have to say my answer, and then they'd convey it in Farsi to the judge. But most of the time I had no idea what the hell was going on, including my own lawyer's defense, because I saw at one point he got up and gave a speech for about 10 minutes in Farsi. No one told me what he was saying. I still to this day don't know what he said.
You had your conviction was after how long after you'd been detained and incarcerated? Did you have your trial and conviction?
It was about 10 or 11 months into my incarceration.
So just go through it. So you get detained at the airport. I believe I know initially you were detained in a hotel, not quite so bad then.
Yes.
What happened?
So I was in a hotel, ironically called the Ideal Hotel.
The Ideal Hotel.
Yes, just off Valley
I hope
Ars.
you were getting your Marriott points.
You can look it up on Google Maps, and it did have guests in it too. So it was a hotel under the control of the IRGC.
You were another guest of the Ayatollah then, yeah.
Yes, but it looked like it had genuine tourist types staying there too, which was very strange, but I guess part of the cover. Because I had CCTV and wires all through my hotel room, monitoring every word I uttered and every step I took.
I have to ask, even in the bathroom and things like that? Was it that bad?
I assume so, but I don't know.
Okay.
There were certainly in prison, there were in the bathrooms. In the hotel room, I'm not sure, but I assume there were. These guys have no shame, right?
No.
But I was there for a week, imprisoned in this hotel room, and then somebody made the decision, no, we're going to take her to prison. We're going to have a proper, interrogation there, and we're going to deprive her of everything and shake her down and make her life hell so that she cooperates better. Because they kept telling me, you're not cooperating enough. you're not telling us everything you know. Tell us more. And I, wasn't giving them the answers they wanted.
And when they moved you from the hotel to a prison, was that Evin Prison?
Yes, Evin, the Dualif unit run by the IRGC
The IRGC. And did you have a private room there, or were you in a bunk kind of thing?
I was in a private room of sorts, you could call it a solitary confinement cell.
Solitary confinement.
Yeah. I spent 12 months in solitary all up, but the first month was the worst because it was the extreme solitary cell designed to psychologically break you.
Did you have anything to read, anything to listen to?
No.
Except when they
Nothing.
It must have been hard to keep your sanity in that situation. No? What did you do?
You don't. You go insane. The whole thing is designed to break you down psychologically so that you sign a false confession and so that you give up all information you might know or invent stuff if you don't, It's really horrific. It's psychological torture.
It's psychological torture. And I'm sorry to ask, but you feel like, you feel like you're recovered now, or are you still recovering? I mean, you look great. You sound great. I've heard you speak just recently and more than coherently. You're an academic and a scholar. But, I mean, inside, are you still healing?
Yeah, of course I am. It's been 3.5 years since my release. So you go through phases, People expect you to be this broken mess when you come out of such an ordeal. But the first year was great. I mean, I was euphoric. I was ecstatic to be free and on a high.
Yeah, you had a life again.
Yeah, and you enjoy all those small pleasures in life once more. And
you appreciate them in a different way, don't you? Because it's like a near-death experience in a way. And in fact, it is, because you didn't know you'd ever get out. You didn't know you wouldn't die there.
Exactly. You really revel in every little aspect of being free again. And it's when that dust settles and you come down, I think, that you can crash. So it's a process. It's a journey over time, for sure.
Did they try to get you to confess to the crimes you had not committed? Was that part of the process?
Absolutely.
You had to decide whether or not to do that.
Yes, I did.
Because you thought maybe it'll be easier if I do, no?
Yes, and they lie to you constantly, and they tell you, whilst they're breaking you down in solitary, they pull you out for an interrogation, and they're telling you it'd be easier for you. We'll shorten the process. We'll go easy on you. We'll be nice to you if you confess to this. We know you did it. We've got evidence. We've got all this. They make up evidence. Sign here, sign on the dotted line and confess you're a spy.
And they want to be a spy for Israel or a spy for Australia or America, or they didn't really care?
They couldn't figure it out.
They couldn't.
So I was accused of being a spy for multiple countries. And in the end, they settled on a combination of Israel and the US or Australia. They were saying I was spying for multiple intelligence services at once, and they couldn't figure out, or MI6 as well. They couldn't figure out which one.
Impressive.
Yeah.
They also attempted, I don't know if simultaneously or to recruit you.
Yeah. I think they had this in mind from the initial moment of my arrest, because one of the key IRGC recruiters was present there at the airport when I was arrested and present at some of the hotel interrogations. But a different faction got control of me, and that faction wanted to use sticks over carrots, and they were the ones that sent me to the Dualif unit in Evin. And these are the guys
unit,
that.
Sorry,
Dualif, the unit that the IRGC controls in Evin.
In Evin Prison.
Yeah, so they won out, but the recruiters came back later after I'd been sentenced. They had that over me. They could blackmail me with that, and they tried again.
And there you had, and they wanted you to do something like keep tabs on Iranian diaspora in Australia, maybe, or what? Did they have specific instructions? They said, "Here's what you could do for us if we let you out. We have an assignment for you." Is that kind of how it went?
I didn't progress in the conversation enough with them to have the specific details, but I know they were sounding me out from time to time, and I know they were interested in the UK and Israel. Never Australia. I mean, Australia is not important to them at all.
To them. The interrogators were male, I assume?
Yes.
They didn't have female interrogators?
No.
But they had women in the room with you anyway? During interrogations, or not necessarily?
Look, they were supposed to. They didn't always, but by law, by their own rules, the IRGC's own rules, a female prison guard must be present at all times when a female prisoner is in the presence of any males.
And that is because of, go ahead.
Sharia instances. You can't have a unmarried or someone who is not in your literal harem, like someone who is not, sacred to you, be alone in a room with you for sexual impropriety reasons.
Is that to protect the interrogator from the terrible feelings of passion that Kylie might inspire in him, or is that to protect Kylie's modesty?
I think they'll claim it's both, but
Yeah.
it's just the adherence to these kind of strictures. But it's very interesting that they weren't there all the time.
Yeah.
Oh, they break their own rules.
Yeah.
They break their own
Yeah,
rules.
yeah.
And did you have to wear a hijab, or did they look at you, stare at your hair?
I had to wear both a hijab and a chador.
And a chador. While you're being interrogated, you had to wear a
At all
chador.
times.
At
Not
all
just while I'm
times.
alone in my cell, no, but every other place I went, I had to wear a hijab and a chador over
Yeah,
the
the
top.
chador is the full outfit, just everybody. Yeah, no.
How
full.
about back when you were transferred to an all-women's cell? They were all just the same?
When I was in Karchak prison, which was at the very end of my ordeal in Iran in 2020, if it was a women's prison,
Yeah.
but there were men that sometimes entered. The head of the prison, of course, was a man because, heaven forbid, a woman might manage it. So if he ever did his rounds or maintenance workers or anything, you had this mad scramble to everyone put on their hijabs and chadors before these men come in. But when it was just the women alone in the cell, we didn't have to wear hijab.
And at that point, you were not in solitary confinement in that prison. You were in again, more like kind of a dormitory kind of room?
It was 100 women in one room,
Sleeping
in triple tier bunk beds and some on the floor because there was not enough beds. And look, this is well at the end of my story. This is 2 years into my incarceration. After I was convicted, I was given a 10-year prison sentence. I battled them on the issue of getting recruited for a very long time. In the end, I was able to leak to the press that they were trying to recruit me, which was the only way to stop them.
How did you leak to the press? How did you do that?
I can't tell you.
Okay. All
But
right.
I had assistants getting messages out. Some very brave people helped me.
Yeah.
I have a question actually on the transfer to this other prison. We have a few other friends who've unfortunately been political prisoners, them having been born and raised in Iran. They really hold over a transfer over some of these folks. They say, we'll put you in a cell with criminals. We'll put you in a cell.
That's true.
And I've heard stories from, just young Iranian male protesters of having to shower with convicted, rapists, murderers, criminals. And the regime uses this as kind of a psychological tool. If you don't want to be in the cell with them, you better comply and you better do the forced confession.
That's so true. They did that with me. That's the reason I was sent to Karchak prison. It was a punishment.
To break.
No, I had been resisting. I'd escaped from my prison unit. I'd been on hunger strikes. I'd been smuggling.
On the roof of Evin at one point?
I got on the roof of Evin. I smuggled notes out of the prison statements. I was a naughty prisoner, let's say. And I was punished by being sent to Karchak prison in the desert with no fresh drinking water, full of criminals and bad people. And they thought that would punish me. I was happy to be there. And I took great pleasure in reminding my interrogators of that when they came to visit me, because I had been in solitary confinement for 7 months prior to my transfer. And I was suddenly living with people again. And that was amazing. That was more important, that human connection, than who these people were. I mean, some of the murderers were my friends. I used to braid one of them's hair every day. She was convicted of murder. And some of the more seedy types were actually really lovely people, and they'd take a shining to you and they'd protect you from others. So we had a lot of fun, and it was much more of a normal existence than being alone in a cell going crazy inside your own head. So I preferred being there.
And you were learning Farsi, which couldn't have been easy to do, but it had a lot of conversational practice, I guess.
Yeah, it was great for my Farsi. And I just learnt so much about Iran and about society and culture of the place, living with such a diverse group of people. Some were highly educated, many hadn't even graduated high school, of all ages, elderly people, teenage girls, Afghans. It was a contingent of drug mules from Thailand, from Philippines, Indonesia, Sri Lanka.
So it was very international. This was where you were, the prison dorm, whatever, was international in that sense?
I was the only Westerner, but there were several. Afghans. There's a lot of Afghans in Iran's prisons, but they don't really count in the same way. I don't think many of them. They're all resident of Iran, I guess. But the foreign drug mules were another cohort that were very interesting to hear about and get to know. But back to Behnam's question, It's certainly a punishment. And most Iranian prisoners are terrified, political prisoners, of being sent to Qarchak or such a place because you hear stories. I mean, people get knifed in their beds at night because of gang warfare or whatever, and you have drugs in there and you have addicts in there and people who have diseases that spread around and all of that. We had human connection and friendship and normal behaviour in society again, and that meant more to me.
And during all this time, what was the UN doing to help you?
The UN?
UN, human rights, the Secretary General of the UN? Nothing.
Nothing?
I know. It was a trick question. I knew the answer to that. Part. Any NGOs that were willing to help you or trying to help you?
A lot of NGOs spoke out and called for my release, including Human Rights Watch and Amnesty and, the usual ones, as well as Iran-focused NGOs in the West. So I'm very grateful for that. It is a human rights issue at the end of the day, taking of hostages. I wasn't aware of much of this, so I was entirely cut off from most information from the outside. What
about the Australian government? How strong a role did they play or attempt to play in all this?
Well, they got me out in the end. I was there for 2 years and 3 months, and this deal they put together, it was a very complicated trilateral deal. Full credit to them. They got me out in the end and, they saved me. I could still be there today otherwise. Right. I do have my criticisms, but they did deliver at the end of the day. And maybe just explain quickly what that means, a trilateral deal. You know the story I want you to tell here about the terrorists who were incarcerated in Thailand, who are clearly terrorists convicted, but they were going to be freed in exchange for you. Yeah. These 3 guys were IRGC people sent to Thailand to bomb, I think, some aspect of the Israeli diplomatic mission there. And they'd been caught, and in the sort of, whilst they were being arrested, one of them blew off his own legs by accident trying to throw a bomb at Thai police. So at least, the
video exists for people who are interested, by the way.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Really?
Of him throwing it and getting blown up?
Exactly. It bounces back, the grenade.
I haven't seen this video. Yeah. I've seen the pictures of them partying with prostitutes in Thailand the night before. Total adherence to IRGC ideology
that
there.
Sharia component we talked about.
And they were drinking alcohol too, I think.
Well, did they plan to be martyrs in the next day? Is that why they were?
No, I thought.
Or they were just like,
it looked like it was an assassination attempt or like a bombing attempt. It was unfortunately at a time in the Israel-Iran-America kind of competition phase where there was a lot of embassy attacks. I think it was around the same time or before or after the Burgas, Bulgaria bomb attack by Hezbollah. I think 6 or 7 innocent civilians died. I think the Iranians had tried something in Georgia, something in India as well was reported. None of this was confirmed. And this was following a famous speech by Khamenei very early in 2012 about being very loud and proud that if anyone who stands against Israel will help them. And then you kind of see like transnational, multiple jurisdiction bombing attacks on what they perceive to be Israeli or Jewish interests.
It's also worth noting, I think, that when you went to Iran for this conference, you were not only had you not written particularly about Iran, but you were not unsympathetic to the regime, the JCPOA, the deal that Obama tried to cut with them. You thought was probably a good idea. In other words, you were really sympathetic, a sympathetic character, or could be, but they didn't care. I mean, they wouldn't care if you were pro-Trump or pro-Bernie Sanders. They wouldn't care. That had nothing to do with it. They were going to do what they were going to do.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I was sympathetic to the regime. I knew it was a nasty regime with a terrible human rights record. But I wasn't, I guess I believed in the potential to reform the regime from
Engagement,
within.
diplomacy.
That diplomacy,
deals,
that you could bring them in from the shadows a little bit. If you engaged with them, particularly economically, maybe could have a moderating effect, which was, think back to 2015, 2014, 15, beginning of 16. That was the the discourse at the time.
It was the discourse. It was the Obama policy. I have to say, we at FTD already understood and had for years that this was showing them respect, protecting their equities, reaching out your hand for an unclenched fist. The fact that Obama had a Muslim father, none of that counted for anything. We
Middle
understood
name Hussein
that
didn't help them at all.
Hussein, no. We knew that, and we tried to persuade the government of that, but no, they had a kind of faculty. I'm sorry to say, excuse me for saying, a faculty lounge view of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and that I think still kind of guides the policy of the Biden administration, which is consistent with the Obama policy, don't you?
Yeah, there's this quote by former National Security Advisor General McMaster, who talks about strategic narcissism.
Who works with FDD,
He's the head of our Center on Military and Political Power. Basically, if it's a relationship between cause and effect, the U.S. is the primary mover for every kind of anti-Americanism or anti-Western move in the world. So if we atone a certain amount, then the other side will change or moderate their behavior. And I think this was disproven in the JCPOA period and following, but unfortunately, I know about you guys, and I worked with you guys before the JPOA even was inked. But unfortunately, I lost a lot of friends in those fights in Washington in the early days of who is Rouhani, the self-styled moderate, not moderate president of Iran. Can nuclear diplomacy be transformational, or is it really transactional? These are really philosophical debates about statecraft and also soulcraft. And where you stand in life on these issues depends a great deal on where you sit. And if you're the president and you want to get something done, there were a lot of sacred cows that were sacrificed en route to that deal. Unfortunately, one of the big ones was standing with the Iranian people in 2009. But this is part of a much larger story.
And this brings back to one other point that you made that I want you to expand upon. When you were in the prison with the criminals and the kind of general criminal population, a lot of them were quite friendly to you, not hostile to you. And two, you heard a lot of dissent for the regime among this population in the prison, which is kind of fascinating to me.
Yeah, it was a microcosm of Iranian society more broadly in many ways. I mean, you had all sorts of social strata and social classes, majority quite poor, which unfortunately, more than 50% of the Iranian populace is below the poverty line today. The regime has destroyed the economy, its corruption, its mismanagement of the
its
oil and
expenditures
resources.
on terrorists in places like Lebanon and Gaza and Yemen.
Yeah.
We were hearing just, how many years have we heard that Yemen is a great human rights catastrophe? They have no food, no medicine, but plenty of rockets, missiles, and drones.
And getting better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's, the everyday people see that, right?
Yeah.
I had many heartbreaking conversations. One of them was with a Kurdish woman who was in prison.
Iranian Kurdish, right?
Yeah,
the Kurdish areas of Iran. Okay.
There were a lot of Kurds, I would say, in prison, a larger proportion of Kurds than they are of the general population outside of prison.
Because of persecution of the Kurds, would you say, or? Hard to say.
Also economic deprivation. Yeah. A lot of people were just there because they were poor and they've done desperate things, or they've done nothing and it's been an unjust case again, because the justice system in Iran doesn't function even for regular people, not just for political cases.
Right.
But this Kurdish woman was heartbreaking. She first taught me how to smoke crack cocaine in the prison. Not that I smoked it, but she was giving me an instruction about that for some reason in Farsi. But she told me she was homeless and had 4 children. Her husband abandoned her and she kicked her out, and she was on the streets with 4 children. She had a choice. Either she sells drugs or she sells herself. But she needed to do something to put a roof over these children's head. And you know what she said to me? She said, I was stupid. I decided to sell the drugs. I should have become a prostitute. Prostitutes get the pardon of the supreme leader within a couple of years of prison. Us drug smugglers or drug sellers have to see out our sentence in full, and I've got 15 years.
And Iran does execute drug offenses. In fact, it's one of the biggest bulks in every year, because Iran unfortunately keeps breaking its own record of people they imprison and people they kill. Drug-related offenses are huge, and this is one area where the UN has been actually helpful in bringing the spotlight on Iran drug trafficking and drug consumption. In fact, there's even movies in the Islamic Republic made about the lack of a win in the war on drugs. I think there was one right before COVID that came to Washington I saw. The thing was just under 6 or 6 feet under or something like that was the title. And it just shows how the Iranian police force is even part of this corrupt network, and how, there's a lot of tactical wins but strategic losses, and so many of these kind of fork in the road moments for society, where you think the drug dealer is really the what would you call it, the evil perpetrator, but really the victim of a much larger situation.
Well, to the regime, which is a judicial, theological regime, is it that drug use is a more serious criminal offense than prostitution? Because prostitution is, well, you could have marriages of convenience and under. You
could have temporary marriages in Shiite Islam. Unfortunately, this is something that they even do and permit for up to a half hour, and then spouses abroad.
It's a quickie marriage.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, but is that the reason that it's a more serious crime?
I'm not sure. I think it might have to do with some kind of ethic, especially if it's the supreme leader doing the pardoning.
But also they believe a prostitute can be reformed. I mean, they had all these programs. If you memorize the Quran, you can get years lopped off your sentence. And so a lot of I guess it's a morality crime. It's sort of classified as such, along with hijab-related offences and other things that fall into that category. If a woman demonstrates that she's become pious, she's memorized the Quran, she dresses with appropriate hijab, she repents for her sins, they'll let her out of prison and give her a second chance. But drugs is because Afghanistan's next door, there's this huge flow, and there's this huge problem with drug addiction in Iran. Millions of people are addicted to drugs, huge social problems as a result of that. I think they've just taken a super hardline approach on drugs.
The other day, Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, released Johan Floderis, if I pronounce it right, a UN diplomat. He had been charged with extensive measures against the security of the country, extensive intelligence cooperation with the Zionist regime, and corruption on earth. And he was released in exchange for Hamid Nouri. Tell us who Hamid Nouri is.
Yeah, unfortunately, Hamid Nouri is part of what we call the injustice apparatus of the Islamic Republic, much like Iran's former president, Ibrahim Raisi. This was someone involved in the killings in '87 at the tail end of the Iran-Iraq War, the clearing of Iran's political prisoners, largely but not exclusively of leftists and dissidents and dissenters. They carried out a fatwa, or a religious edict, from Iran's then supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei, and really a lot of the human rights community had been instrumental in pushing for universal jurisdiction, I think is the phrase, to catch this guy for when he did travel abroad. And in many of the confession videos of this individual, of Hamid Nouri, you have the individuals having a different last name. I think it was Abbasi was his last name, saying, "Oh, this was our interrogator, this was our prosecutor." And that did create a little bit of issues with this transnational or universal jurisdiction case. But in the end, when Hamid Nouri came back to Iran after this hostage, I don't even want to say swap, because this person was actually a convicted criminal.
Well, that was the case in your case too. We're talking about innocent people being swapped for real criminals, which also, by the way, means that the regime, for example, can say to somebody, "Here's what I need you to go out and do: an act of terrorism, assassination, or whatnot. Don't worry, if you get caught, we'll pick up some guy who comes to Iran, and we'll trade for you. We'll get you out. It's not a big problem. We don't have to find somebody who's like you. We just have to find somebody."
Exactly. And that's why it's always an unfair deal. And this individual, when he came back, he was gloating that, because they had a hard time labeling the AKA having a different last name. He was gloating, "I am that guy." He confirmed it when he didn't confirm it in court, for instance. And he said, "Look at all of you guys, you're kind of all living abroad, getting welfare from the social security network of Albania or whatever else, but I'm in Iran with my family." And in that sense, it wasn't just a veiled threat against the leftists and the MEK and the people whose family members he had killed, but really against all of Iran's diaspora and any kind of dissident. He says, "Look, I'm in Iran, I'm where I'm from, and you guys are far-flung all around the world." So the gloating was really despicable. It was a very rough couple of days.
Now, my confident assumption is that the EU diplomat, Johan Floderis, I don't know what he was doing in Iran. I think it was like tourism, which maybe so, but that he's in that situation, that he did absolutely nothing. But what has been the EU reaction to this, as far as you know?
unfortunately, I think they lauded the deal. I mean,
you see, this is where, and then this gets to the larger question of what they call hostage diplomacy. But I think it's kind of a misnomer. Because what you're talking about, it seems to me that the EU should say, you know what? As a result of what you've done, we're cutting off relations with Iran. It seems to me that Australia, in your case, should have said, we are recalling our ambassador. We are letting your ambassador is leaving. If this continues, our trade relations will be cut off as well. In other words, when you call it hostage diplomacy, you have in the U.S. a special envoy for hostage affairs. Good people, I know. It seems to me you're kind of normalizing and legitimizing this practice. You're saying, well, we know you do this. Now we have to figure out what we can do. And in a lot of cases, we're gonna make trades, and maybe we'll pay you money. Maybe we'll pay you billions of dollars, which of course encourages that to continue and encourages other countries to do it. So, for example, we have Evin Gorshkovich, right? Pronouncing it right? Who, the Wall Street Journal, an accredited journalist in Russia. I don't believe that Putin thinks he did anything wrong. I think he thinks I can do that. And years ago, an accredited journalist would have been off limits.
A red line.
It would have been a red line. Once you got your accreditation from the Soviet government, and I spent a lot of time a reasonable amount of time in the Soviet Union, you're accredited. They could take somebody else, or they might catch you doing something. There was always something they'd catch you doing. Women would try to bring you to a hotel room where they'd have photography, so they could, now we got you on this. You could exchange money on the black market. Now we got you on this. They'd find a crime, but they would find a crime. It wouldn't be as simple as, oh, this is an accredited journalist. We'll just take him, see what we can get. There's something we want. Or you're Brittany Griner, right? The basketball player had she had a little cannabis in her bag. But what did we give them in exchange? An arms dealer, right?
The Lord of War.
Huh?
The Lord of War guy.
The Lord of War guys. I don't think this is an effect. I don't think we have in the U.S. or in the West in general an effective strategy or policy vis-a-vis this kind of hostage taking by these bad actors such as the Islamic Republic of Iran, Russia, China in some cases. I think we're normalizing and legitimizing it. And I think that's a huge mistake. And there's actually, in a way, there's an even bigger question, and it's a question of political scientists. We are now in a situation where international law applies to some countries and not to others. And we are normalizing and legitimizing that. And at that point, what is the purpose of international law if it only binds the hands of good actors and on a chronic, consistent basis doesn't bind the hands of Russia, of China, of North Korea, of Venezuela, of Cuba? This is a real conundrum that I don't think you can just say, well, we're good people, so we have to abide by international law. We don't expect them because they're not good people. Yeah, but now they're winning in a lot of different ways. I think this deserves more attention than it's gotten from the U.S. government, from think tank community, from academic community, that it's not enough to just say this is the way it is. We have to get along. We have to live with it.
Kylie, I'd be curious for your opinion about this, because one community that has been in some way making its voice known on this topic is the Iranian American community, or the Iranian diaspora community, or the hyphenated Iranian community, which some do come and go from where they live now abroad and then back to Iran. But then a lot of them don't, citing obviously the increased hostage taking and obviously a lot of other issues going to a place like the Islamic Republic of Iran. But they've talked about kind of a way to get equity, which is there a way to threaten that which the regime holds dear? Is it assets, to the point where in London you can go after a Russian oligarch's girlfriend's boat or bank account or building, but for some reason we're having a hard time in Europe seizing the assets and businesses and or bank accounts of regime money changers or illicit financiers. That's one. And then the other is obviously on the personnel front. They do send a lot of people who travel and study, perhaps not the forefront, even though you did have a former Rouhani government person in Canada a little while ago, and it was the Iranian diaspora that pointed out this person is in Canada, and then the Canadian government took appropriate measures. Is it worth I don't think targeting is the right word, but is it also worth detaining and prosecuting some of these individuals, banking, business elites, children of elites, children of political, military, religious elites who are in Spain, are in America, are in Canada, are in South America, are across Europe? Or is, an eye for an eye leaves everybody blind? Where are you on that?
I think there's something in that. I think we have to cling to our legal system and our independent judiciary and the rule of law, and we can't sacrifice that. But working within that, there is so much dirty money coming out of Iran into the West, as well as the children of high-ranking regime officials bringing that dirty money or acting in other illicit ways, as well as officials sent by the Islamic Republic undercover or in plain sight of day. We know who many of these people are. If we really wanted to crack down on them and investigate them, same as we did with the Ukraine sanctions going after the oligarchs' money and their properties and investments and etc., we can do the same for the Iranian regime if the will is there. And certainly if somebody is taken hostage from a Western country, that country could potentially take a few of these known agents of the Islamic Republic into custody under foreign interference laws and say, okay, well, if you want these guys back, you give our hostage back. I think that's legitimate as long as it's within the rule of law and as long as in a court that's free and fair, we're able to show that these guys are actual agents of the Islamic Republic or they've laundered funds from Iran into our country illegally or whatever. They have committed a crime, therefore we're able to arrest them. And I don't see why that isn't an option.
Or even lower-hanging fruit, maybe circumscribing or limiting, or even, as Cliff mentioned, cutting off diplomatic relations once some of these things do happen. I mean, obviously, you do need that for the political intercourse, but if you're in the business of not doing hostage diplomacy and you're really in the business of punishment and trying to triage the number of hostages that continue to be taken, step number one is to actually limit their footprint. The U.S. does not have American staffing the interest section in Iran, but the Iranians have Iranian staffing the interest section right here a few blocks away, actually, in Washington, D.C. They move near a place that has really good squash, the sport.
Yeah, and you could limit them at the UN, those who are...
that happened under the previous administration.
Right. You can really limit them. You can look at the children of regime figures. And, I can understand you can say maybe these children of regime figures come here and they go back with an appreciation for Thomas Jefferson. Maybe, although in American universities today, I doubt anybody does. But but you could say, well, I'm sorry, your visa has been canceled. We're not allowing, you're not going to be here anymore. We're not going to... Trade relations should be more important to them than to us. And with secondary sanctions, you can make it a lot harder. We have in the past to sell oil even to China, for example. I mean, you could really put pressure on. And if your goal, it seems to me the goal has to be, yes, get back your hostages, but don't encourage future hostage taking at the same time. Do things that discourage it. So they say, you know what, we don't need to go through that. This is not going to work out well in the end for us. But right now, if you're the Islamic Republic of Iran, if you're Russia, if you're China, you think, no, hostage taking will work out very well for us. We always win. They always lose because they're stupid. And they don't know how to pressure us, and we know how to pressure them. And there are rules for them that don't apply to us. And again, I understand what you're saying about we have to be better than them and we have to abide by rules. But at the same time, I also think there should be ways. I think we should be creative enough to say we can put pressure on these regimes. We have to be stronger economically. We have to be stronger militarily, and by a lot. But look, another example of what I'm talking about are the Houthis in Yemen, who, again, as we said, are being supplied by the Iranian Republic, and the U.S. government is not even saying that, much less pressuring them, much less. It's purely defensive. It's not saying you don't want to mess with us. Let me tell you what we're going to do to you if you continue. That's not where, and we should be doing that to the Iranians, saying you stop supplying the Houthis, not just to the Houthis, although you should hit them harder than we have been.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a number of soapboxes I would love to stand on to talk about the Iran proxy challenge or the Iran Houthi challenge, but just the real magic word in what Kylie was saying, I think, was the will. I certainly do believe we are better, and our rules and our norms and whatnot is much better, but we have to win to make sure that it can continue to be better.
That's right.
And the will to win, the will to, when they punch, you have to punch back. And I've seen a real lack of that. And unfortunately, I've seen that in Kylie's own country, visiting in Australia. I've seen that in a lot of places that have, very high level intelligence cooperation with the United States, the so-called Five Eyes countries, like the UK, like New Zealand, for example, and across the European Union as well. And that lack of will is really understood, I think, by the Islamic Republic. And, Kylie, you can put real meat on the bone here. Is it buffoonery? Is it brilliance? I think the Iranians are often sometimes both and none at the same time. But a lot of the stuff they can do is opportunistic because they know that the threat will not come down bearing on them like it might in some other areas. I'm always, whenever I talk to the Europeans, impressed by their resolve on Russia relative. But how come they're afraid of someone like Khamenei when they're not afraid of someone like Putin?
Really?
It's mind-boggling.
You said something before we started recording this podcast that struck me and that was that you met a lot of. Well, let me start with this. FDD and particularly Mark Dubowitz has been arguing for years that we should be supporting the Iranians when they attempt to rise up against this regime, and they haven't. And I think particularly the woman life freedom movement, to a lot of people, to me, is inspiring. And I didn't see the U.S. or other Western countries supporting it as they should. These are people with values like ours trying to be free. How could we not support that? And the quote that I heard you say, that there were people you spoke to, I guess mostly in the prison, who would say, we don't need the West to help us. We just need the West to stop helping this regime. That really strikes me.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this is just, this was an unprecedented opportunity, the Mahsa Amini woman life freedom protests.
And Mahsa Amini is a Kurdish Iranian woman wearing her hijab wrong. They killed her.
Yeah.
Just which started the women life freedom movement. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, why did the West not stand up for those people who took to the streets in unprecedented numbers all over Iran, not just in the capital or something, calling for regime change essentially through peaceful means?
Very essentially, I mean, death to the dictator is often what they chanted, right?
And this was in small towns and villages. It was in main capital cities. It was in every province. I mean, you saw Kurdistan and Baluchistan, two restive Sunni majority provinces in Iran, be the main drivers regionally outside the capitals. But you saw, unprecedented solidarity between different ethnic and religious groups in Iran too, all united with this one demand: get rid of the regime. And sure, they didn't want us to supply arms or something like that. But again, don't help the regime. Take a hard line on sanctions. Don't unfreeze assets. Don't turn a blind eye to the sale of oil to China or whoever else. And, I think, unfortunately, the fact that this coincided with the Ukraine war meant, the price of oil was too high. All of this Russian oil and gas had been sanctioned. So the thinking was, well, we need this Iranian oil to come to market to replace, the oil that's been taken off the market from Russia. Otherwise, the price will be unacceptably high. This was very short-term thinking. This was an unprecedented opportunity to try and remove this regime from power, help the Iranian people do the job and remove their own regime.
Another thing the U.S. could be doing, it would be supplying more oil and gas to the world. We're supplying a lot, but that's not because Biden wants to. It's happening, though he's stopped a lot of LNG exports. The U.S. should be the world's energy superpower, because that would be helpful in these situations. And back, was it 2019? The people are out in the street. This
November,
phrase,
December, yeah.
This phrase in Farsi, you probably do too. Obama, are you with us or against us?
2009, yes.
2009. I'm sorry, and it
rhymes in Persian.
It rhymes in Persian.
It rhymes in Persian.
Obama, say it in Persian.
Obama, yaba una, yaba ma. Are you with us or are you with them? And I mean, with the with them business is very interesting because we've all in Washington watching this max pressure start, under the previous administration, always kind of come to this conclusion, okay, that's against the regime, what about the people? And that's really where this discourse that now you see evolved on maximum support, or maximum care was initially called, but that sounded too much like car insurance, so maximum support became. That's really where it came from, to fill this hole. And we have actually put out with another Iranian-American organization like a 10-point plan, but we have a step 0 in the 10-point plan. And it coincides exactly with what you said, Kylie, which is step 0 is do no harm. before you get into the business of empowering the Iranian people, you need to get out of the business of empowering their oppressors. And unfortunately, this requires a bit more risk tolerance, a bit of a longer time horizon. But if you give us those things, if you grant us those things, theoretically and in real life, you can have much more success down the line. And unlike a lot of other places in the Middle East, where your head and your heart may not be in the same place, Iran is one of the few places, I think, where you can actually have that convergence rather than that daily contest. You mentioned looking at the Middle East, previously looking at the other side of the Persian Gulf. America doesn't necessarily have that luxury of that marriage of strategy and values, even though these are our longstanding partners and mean no disrespect or ill will towards them. But this is really one of those places where you don't have to make a trade-off. And the problem is that the U.S. has failed in both. It's failed both on the statecraft side and it's failed on the soulcraft side with Iran. It's failed to kind of cajole a better policy from the government, and it's failed to really stand with the Iranian people in practice.
And I got to say, I do believe, and I know you believe, and I think there's some evidence for this, not just impressionistic, that if the Iranian people were free, they'd be some of the best friends America has, not least because they've had a 40-year experiment with Islamist theocratic government, and they know that's not, human life does not flourish under this kind of government. They know that. And I think it would be different than anyhow, I do think there would be. Anything else we should be asking Kylie before we let her go? Poor Kylie.
I mean, I can think of one more thing just to, abuse your goodwill, not to keep you hostage.
No. You've imprisoned me in this podcasting room.
We'll get you coffee if you want, and some cheesecake.
No Persian tea.
Okay.
But it is about this fundamental policy towards those who continue to take hostages. There's a conceptual debate. There's a real-world debate about how much media attention should be put towards elevating the case of a hostage once it's actually happened. You've testified in front of a British commission on this, or provided evidence before the British Parliament, along with a lot of other experts. Some have had very different ideas about how much media limelight should be given to these cases. What do you say to those people who say, no, it should always be in the darkness, or no, there should be a stratified way to bring the hostage issue the more you fail to deal with their law enforcement, or the more you fail to deal with the foreign ministry? How do we deal with the issue of popularizing and publicizing the plight of hostages when, unfortunately, as was the case in your case, it was a lot of restraint and a lot of clamping down by the government that the hostage is actually from? The Swedish individual, he was taken months before the press actually reported it. There continue to be Europeans that go home and back and forth, but that we only realized through the media this person was hostage X number of months before the story went live.
I think we need a case-by-case approach. I don't think it's correct to say that media coverage is the only way that we should get somebody free. I made the distinction earlier when we were speaking prior to recording this between non-state actor kidnappings and hostage takings and those of states like Iran. It can raise the price of the hostage. Big media campaign, a big public profile, pressure on that local government to free their citizen. Obviously, that does raise the stakes in many ways in terms of negotiating. And if that group is after money, then the numerical price that they're able to demand for that person does go up. Mm-hmm. So we do need to be cognizant of that. I do think there are a few cases, particularly involving Iran hostages, where the person became so prominent that it was harder to get them out, and they probably spent more time in prison than was necessary because of the complexities involved with such a high-profile case. But that being said, I don't see any precedent for media coverage leading to a state actor hostage being treated worse in prison or being threatened in any way. I don't think the sort of regular arguments that are wheeled out by consular services of various countries that, your loved one could be harmed in prison or something bad could happen to them if the family speaks out. I don't think there's any precedent demonstrating that. In my case, I was actually treated better in prison once the media reported on my conditions. Stuff like access to medical care, which was often instrumentalized against me. It was a reward. If I was behaving myself, I could see a doctor. If I wasn't behaving myself, even they beat me up on one occasion. I wasn't even allowed a Band-Aid to, stop myself from bleeding. So this stuff matters. And that spotlight of media attention on my physical conditions and situation in prison meant they could no longer do that. They had to show that they were treating me well, and so they did treat me better. So I do think that's a sort of an underappreciated aspect as well. And governments who wheel out this line of absolutely no media campaign whatsoever are probably motivated by their own interests more than that of the detainee.
And I'll just reiterate that longer term, more broadly, we cannot be legitimizing, normalizing, accepting that this is the way the world is. Bad countries take hostages, we pay for them, we trade criminals and terrorists for them. What are you going to do? That's not sufficient, it seems to me. They should be, I don't think that's what we should settle for. I think that's wrong. Anything we should have asked you that we didn't, that you particularly want to mention?
I mean, we had such a broad conversation, right? We covered everything. We covered so many subjects.
Kylie, thank you so much for coming in. I really appreciate it. I've really learned a lot from talking to you, and really great to have you here and to get to meet you.
Thank you to you both. It's been a pleasure to be here.
And to all of you who have been with this conversation, thank you. But buy Kylie's book, The Uncaged Sky, My 804 Days in an Iranian Prison. You must read it. You'll learn even more than you learn from this. Until next time, I'm Cliff May, and you've been listening to Foreign Policy.